Welcome to Wider View, the program that provides perspectives on the news outside the narrow confines of the mainstream media. I'm your host, Charles Dunaway. I'm very pleased to welcome Catherine Shakdam back to Wider View. Catherine is a research fellow at the Bayan Centre for Planning and Studies and a political analyst specializing in radical movements. And she's also the author of A Tale of Grand Resistance, Yemen, the Wahhabi, and the House of Saud. We're about to have a new president here in the U.S., I think. And there's changes perhaps in U.S. foreign policy, particularly in the Middle East. And I thought we'd talk about some of those and try to get an assessment of whether this is a good thing or a bad thing for U.S. Middle East policy. The two things that struck me with this initially was Biden has said that he is opposed to the war against Yemen. And there's been some talk about him doing a little distancing from the Saudis. What do you make of all that?
Look, to be honest with you, this is one of the things that I tend to not believe. The reason being, 2020 has been a very strange year to begin with, and it was a presidential election anyway. So, of course, the Democrats who wanted to win those elections were going to say all the things, that the people wanted to hear, basically to try to distance themselves as much as they can from President Trump's policies. And so, evidently, he's colluding with the Saudis, and his friendship in particular with Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince, was highlighted because as far as they were concerned, it was a really good pressure point to try to say, oh, look at the Republicans, look at what Donald Trump is doing and the kind of behavior that he's condoning and wants to carry out in the Middle East is not acceptable. So I would say that from a moral perspective, yes, it was the right thing to say. Whether or not they actually committed, to apply those promises and to make them come true is another matter altogether. I'm looking at what Obama has done in the past, or even the way that Bill Clinton conducted himself when he was president. When it comes to the Middle East, whether Democrats or Republicans, the policies are the same, which is one of military interventionism. And the condoning and this ability that they have to apologize war crimes when it's being committed by the mighty and the powerful and the rich, in this case, the Saudis. So I just don't believe it because, Joe Biden was vice president under the Obama administration, and he's done nothing in terms of helping the Middle East. If anything, Obama dropped more bombs and sanctioned more drones attacks than any other president in the history of the United States, in comparison to George Bush, for example, who was a Republican. So I'm not sure that the Democrats can actually position themselves and say we are the party of peace, because that's just simply not true. The records show otherwise. Now, I would say this in Trump's favor is that whether we like him or not, and I think a lot of people get stuck on the character of Donald Trump. And look, he's not sophisticated. He doesn't say things. His delivery is always a bit sketchy, and he's not very diplomatic. He's not a statesman in the sense that he's not a politician, and he doesn't know how to sell a narrative. He's very blunt and quite brutal in the way that he presents things. That said, you have to admit that during his presidency, he did withdraw troops from the Middle East, which I think is a good development for the Middle East. He tried to disengage from Afghanistan, from Iraq, and from Syria. So now people can argue that maybe it wasn't done the right way or it wasn't the right time, but the point is he's done it, which is what the people in the Middle East wanted for decades anyway. Right. So, in that way, I'm going to say that Donald Trump is the only president in a very long time, since maybe the 1990s, to not have declared war, to not have started off a new conflict in the Middle East, and to have tried, maybe he stumbled a little bit, but at least he tried to commit to peace in the sense that he did disengage. And of course, I'm not talking about Israel and Palestine because this is a whole other issue.
Right. We'll get to
but
that.
As far as the Middle East is concerned, I don't want to say that he did good, but he didn't carry on with, the policy of military interventionism. He didn't carry on with the drone attacks as much as his predecessor. He didn't try to open up new fronts, which in itself, for me, is a win. You want a president that is committed to doing things differently. You want a president who maybe uses sanctions to avoid military conflicts. I mean, we might want to try that, before we try something else. So I'm going to say I don't believe Joe Biden. I'm sorry. I know that they want to come across again as, the good people and the people that will save democracy or whatever. But nothing so far has shown me that the Democrats are committed to anything other than sowing divisions, sowing tensions, carrying policy which are so dangerous, like, for example, Black Lives Matters or the, defund the police. It's very dangerous. It's very nihilistic. And they're not solutions in themselves. I know they're very catchy phrases that people, will kind of like rally behind because it sounds like a good idea and they feel that they're somewhat vindicated in their suffering. But this is not helping. This is throwing oil on the fire. If you want to have a real solution, you need to have the hard conversations and to say that you can't use someone's pain and suffering, like African American in the US, and use that as a weapon against, to sow divisions and actually say Black Lives Matters, all lives matter. As a statesman, you should cater to everyone, not a particular demographic. Grant you, America has problems with racism and sectarianism, but you don't approach it and you don't try to fix it by actually isolating another demographic and say it's your fault. We're going to criminalize you. It doesn't work this way. You need to heal, and you need to have a holistic approach to, so you can't just point the finger and say, no, you're going to pay the price because, you were the one doing the abusing before. It doesn't work this way.
No. Well, it seems to me that we have two political parties which agree pretty much on economic issues, on neoliberalism, and the bulk of the Republican Party, not Trump, but the bulk of the Republican Party is fully in with the U.S. hegemony, imperialist rule, interventionism, although they might use a different terminology. And what they're both doing is using cultural things to appeal to a certain group of voters.
It's populism. That's the problem. It's dangerous because
the politics don't appeal to anyone. Yeah.
Exactly. But when you think about, if you look at history and you look at 1930s Germany, this is exactly how Germany became Nazi Germany, because you had people on both sides, playing the populist card and doing, the games of demagoguery. It's very dangerous because you're appealing to the worst of people rather than try to bring people to the table and tell them you're going to have to be reasonable. No one said that being a grown-up was easy. It's hard, and it's a lot easier to kind of throw tantrums and say that grandstand on ethic and morals and say that you're the greater person. I don't think that anyone can teach anyone anything at this stage because both parties have committed atrocious war crimes. They committed crimes against the American people as well by not telling them the truth. And I think it's time that, there's a complete review of how things are being done. You have two parties that are just as bad as one another. If I'm honest, if I'm looking, from the outside, I'm looking at the Republicans and Democrats and I'm thinking, I'm not sure I want any of you in power because you don't deserve it. You're not serving the people.
I think I would agree with you on that one, on that score.
Yeah.
But how we achieve that is another matter. Getting back to the Middle East a little bit, I mean, one of the differences that we had immediately upon Trump's coming in was the ditching of the JCPOA. Obama had done all of this work with Kerry to get this nuclear agreement with Iran. Trump threw it out day one. Biden's coming back and saying, I want to reinstate it. I want to rejoin it. What about that? Is that just talk? Or is Iran going to let them just rejoin it?
No. It's problematic because, first of all, look, on the basis of international law, Trump shouldn't have done what he's done because it's a very dangerous precedent. You can't just throw international law out the window, and once you engage into a contract, you're gonna have to see it through. And basically, what they're doing is showing the international community, whether it's Iran or other countries in the world, that treaties and agreements only stand with the serving president. This is not a good basis for diplomacy because you need to have continuity. So it's a problem to have left it. It would be a problem to come back into it because then what guarantees could you put in place to tell the Iranians, well, in 4 years' time or 8 years' time, we're not going to have another flip-flopping and, we're not going to go back to the drawing table telling you, well, we change our mind. It's going to be very difficult. And the Iranians will use this in their favor, obviously, to try to get more out of it because why wouldn't they? So the problem is that Trump now created a situation and a vacuum legally where the Iranians could say, well, we could do the same thing too, because we could say, yeah, it's fine. We're gonna do it now, but then maybe coming March or next summer, we're just gonna have a change in whatever, and we're just gonna say now we don't want to do it no more. It's. I mean, how do you trust both parties to actually be genuinely committed to following the rules when the rules have been thrown out already? It's very. I think it's very dangerous. So I think the best thing to do would be to start fresh and to do something completely different and to try to reframe the relations in between the US and Iran in a completely different manner, to try to have an agreement that goes beyond the JCPOA and actually encompasses that the real differences in between Iran and the US, which is a cultural difference and a difference in political vision. I think this is the main problem. Whether it's going to be done is hard to say. Personally, I don't think so. I think that the US and Iran are even more on polar opposites today than they were a few years ago. The Middle East is a very different place. Iran has gained a lot of ground as well as kind of lost a lot of its standing because of the death of General Soleimani and the kind of inner conflict that it brought about in Iran. So Iran is a very different country today than it was 4 years ago. So it's very difficult to say whether or not they want to do it too is a good question. I'm not sure that they do. I don't think that Iran sees the US as a legitimate party to any agreement moving forward. So how do you deal with that?
No, I don't think you do. I mean, I think the Russians, as they say, the U.S. is not agreement capable. And I think that's absolutely true. But and it's not just this other thing. It's if a nation does not abide by international law, then will they abide by anything else, any other treaties or whatever else is going on?
Exactly.
So I think the logical step from Iran, because the pressure that's going to be on the president, whoever he is, about Iran is going to be largely coming from the Israel lobby, because that's really the prime mover for some kind of enmity with Iran. Trump did a whole lot of things to basically play up to Netanyahu, moving the embassy, etc. What do you think the Biden administration is likely to do? Will they pull back from some of the Trump things? Will they do anything?
I don't think so. I don't think so. It's so difficult. I mean, the Zionist lobby in America is very powerful. It would be a mistake to think that Joe Biden can just erase what Donald Trump has done. The reason why he's done it because he knew that it would be impossible to kind of roll back on it. How do you go about telling, the Israelis that, oh, by the way, Jerusalem is no longer the capital of Israel. We're going to put back the embassy to Tel Aviv, and then, we're sorry, our bad. Donald Trump was actually quite clever because he made sure that there's financial entanglement as well to his political decisions. So, for example, the embassy in Jerusalem is actually owned by one of his supporters. So they have the contract with the US government right now in terms of leasing the property out to the US government. So they're stuck in a contract. There's a lot of things that would make it's going to make it very difficult for Joe Biden to just go back on this. A lot has been done, to kind of assert, and make sure that Trump's decision is pretty much irrevocable. And again, you have to remember, that by the same way that the Zionists have had a tendency to, expand on Palestinian territories to try to set up new settlements, illegal settlements. It's been impossible for the UN until today to actually make them go back. So whatever ground they gain illegally, they still have to this day, even though it's contested. But technically speaking, de facto on the ground, you have Israeli settlers on this land, and the land is no longer Palestinian as far as the Palestinians are concerned. It's the same thing. Once something becomes a physical reality, it's very difficult to go back and erase that reality and create a new one. So I think that Joe Biden will say that he's going to try to manage the situation, but he's not going to be able to roll back on it. And I don't think he's going to want to either, because he's going to be in a position now to pressure the Israeli government even more and say, well, you're going to have to do this and this. And in exchange, we're just going to be quiet about this. So why would he lose political ammunition when it could be so beneficial to him? And then he could secure another term and say, well, I'm going to cater to the Zionist lobby, and then, they're going to vote for me next time because I'm going to be better than Trump. It's complicated. I think people are fooling themselves if they think it's going to be better. If anything, it's going to get worse.
The two things that I have been reading that people say Biden might do, speculation, is return support for the UN Palestinian Refugee Agency, UNRWA, and reopen the Palestinian embassy, or whatever you want to call it, mission in Washington, D.C. that Trump forced to close. Now, those are, well, the refugee thing is an actual, that's humanitarian. And it seems to me likely that he would do that. I don't think the Israelis care that much.
No, they don't.
But and the embassy thing, I don't know.
Well, look, again, even if they do, even if he does all that and if we kind of restore things, it doesn't mean that it's going to change anything on the ground. Again, those are just gifts that are empty. It's empty promises. It's just saying, oh, we're going to set up a structure. We're going to just, we're going to throw you a bone. But in essence, nothing's going to change anyway. So we're going to go back to talking. We're going to go back to you venting your frustration. But in essence, we're not going to do anything about it anyway. If anything, it's going to make the Palestinians happy in that they're going to say, oh, now politicians going to be back on the table, even though there's no table as such. And we're just going to keep negotiating, forever and ever. But nothing ever changes on the ground anyway.
That does seem to be, to me, the same thing, because we have all this talk now from the Democrats about the two-state solution, which, of course, has been dead. If it was ever alive, it's long gone now. That's just wasting time, or actually giving the Israelis time.
It's political posturing. I mean, nothing ever happened anyway. I mean, we had how many negotiations have been, have taken place, and nothing ever happens from it. So whether it's one state, two states, three states, it's just the same thing. They just keep talking about it.
Yeah, that's right. Well, we should move on. I think the other one, all of these seem to be connected to Israel, but the other place where there's been some difference in policy is Syria. We had Trump apparently attempting to pull out of Syria, and then a couple of times being sort of pulled back in, pushed back in by people in his entourage. And now we're there to protect the oil, or whatever. The Democrats generally have been more supportive of the Syrian war, have they not? I mean, do you think that there will be more U.S. intervention or less?
With Joe Biden, very likely. I think if anything, they're going to go back in there and they're going to make it messier than it was to begin with. People may disagree with Trump withdrawing, but at the end of the day, I think he understood there was no legitimate reason for America to be involved in yet another war that is just lasting forever and not bearing any fruits. I mean, look at Afghanistan. All it has done is just drain the budget. They didn't achieve anything. So why would Syria be any different? And it's gonna complicate things with Turkey. It's gonna complicate things with Russia because they are heavily involved now in Syria because a vacuum was left. It's going to complicate things with the Kurds because they were let down by the Americans yet again. I'm not sure that they would be willing to listen to anyone anymore. Understanding again that depending on which administration they're talking to, policies are very different. So I think that America shot itself in the foot in Syria, and they're not going to be trusted. If anything, if they were to go back, which Joe Biden will most likely do, it's gonna make things worse for everybody, and it's gonna create a domino effect throughout the region. that I don't think will be welcomed. Look, Donald Trump, again, even if people don't like him, at the end of the day, he understood something for me that is key, is that if America is to be a superpower, it needs to lead from a position of economic strength. And that's the only way. If you want to play, the Roman Empire and have military outposts everywhere, we all know what happened. It collapsed because it's not sustainable. And this is what the Democrats have done as a policy. They cater to the military complex. It's not sustainable. It's very dangerous for America's safety. It's only bringing more problems in. And Joe Biden will carry on that policy. And I'm not sure that this is something that people understand. Because I know he comes and he's all smiles. And, they attached Joe Biden to President Obama. And Obama has a good way of delivering news and policies. And he makes jokes and people like him because he is likable. But if you look at Donald Trump, his policies are a lot less dangerous for the Middle East and America than the Democrats. So
but
again,
he's not likable.
He's not likable, but at the end of the day, that's not his job.
Right.
His job is to be in a position of leadership and to do what's right for America, not the rest of the world, America. So it's unfair for people to say, well, he needs to cater to the Syrian and the Iraqis and the Yemeni and the Saudis. No, he doesn't have to do that. What he needs to do is to do his job, which is to cater to the American people and to do what's right for America and keep America safe. And I know it sounds very nationalist and it sounds a little bit fascist, as far as the Democrats are concerned. But at the end of the day, he is elected to be president of the United States of America, not Syria, not Yemen, not China.
Yeah, it struck me for a few years now that one of the effects of Trump, whether you like him or not like him, is I think he has weakened the American empire. That I think
the military complex for sure.
But also diplomatically, I think that people are less willing to trust the United States. In agreements, I think he's done a lot to push allies away and to disrespect allies, particularly in Europe. I don't see that as a bad thing necessarily, because what's important is what's good for the American people. And
exactly, he shook things up. Look, at the end of the day, I think that America was stuck where, because it wanted to play nice with everyone, it kind of committed to agreements and terms that were not good for America. But they wanted to play along and to be part of this kind of globalist agenda, which, I mean, if you're a globalist, it's wonderful. And people say you can't just shut yourself away, which is true. But at the same time, you need to draw a line somewhere and decide that if something is actually detrimental to your own people, do you really want to carry out for the sake of everybody else? I was just saying that, again, Trump, I tend to agree with him in the sense that he didn't want to play into the globalist agenda and decided to make his country stronger and to distance himself from the things he saw as weaknesses. He upset a lot of people, but at the same time, again, he's the president of the United States. He doesn't need to cater to France or the United Kingdom. And if he feels that he could get a greater deal, why not? People need to stop thinking that it's just that he's being selfish. Yeah, he is being selfish. He was elected to be selfish and to make decisions. I mean, look, he didn't just show up. He was elected by millions and millions of people who wanted his policies, who wanted to have something different. So now we're kind of seeing what's happening with the something different. And people might say, well, actually, we don't want it. But do we really want to go back, carry on the way that it was before? I'm not sure it was that great before.
No, I don't think so. But I mean, the Democrats really have no policy position. Well, they have some policy positions that appeal to their donors, but not to their voters.
Well, you need to ask yourself this, because this is the thing that I don't think that people quite understand. A long time ago, I mean, for a very, very long time, the Republicans stood for, free enterprise. And obviously they had all the, the big corporations on their side because, they were more libertarian and they wanted, less state intervention and more to be done to help corporations thrive, which is what the Republicans stand for, essentially, if you want to go at the core value of their policies. Now, the Democrats were more kind of socialist and they were more on the left. Okay. So when you see a shift, when you see the likes of Google and Twitter and Facebook and everyone else, in Silicon Valley to suddenly turn Democrat, you need to ask yourself, why is it that those big corporations and those billionaires are suddenly endorsing a party that is not necessarily supporting free enterprise if there isn't something in the bylines of this agreement, this unspoken agreement, that is slightly worrying for the rest of the population? Because if you look at the way today that Trump is being smeared and attacked in his character and being dragged in the mud and made fun of, by Google and Twitter and Facebook and all mainstream media who are financed by Silicon Valley and the likes of Zuckerberg, if people don't understand that this is the greatest manipulation of all, if they don't understand that we are being censored for disagreeing with with Zuckerberg and co, and that those people are supporting the Democratic Party, what it tells me is that the Democratic Party has become fascist. Because there's no other way of putting it. If you start attacking people for what it is that they think, or even having an argument or a debate on social media, we're not living in a democracy or a free society anymore. No. And this is the president that they claim has been elected today. Someone who actually stands for censorship, someone who wants to tell people how to think, how to be, how to behave, and how to agree with everything coming out of the government's mouth without challenging or asking the real questions. Because if they do, they're going to be cut out of the system. Trump, again, might not be a very nice character, but at the end of the day, when he's saying fake news, he wasn't lying. It's just because he said it so much, it became a meme, and then people are not taking it seriously. It doesn't make it untrue.
No.
It just means that people are refusing to listen to him because mainstream is manipulating the narrative. So I think that people need to wake up and ask themselves, why is it that a company like Google is not supporting the Republicans and instead siding for Joe Biden? Not because they care about the people, not because they care about democracy. What they care about is power. Mm-hmm. And power has been handed to them by the Democrats.
Yes. Well, I think I take your point. That's one of the most dangerous things I think we have now is this. They use the fake news and the fake Russia thing, collusion nonsense, to push this basically censorship.
Well, yeah, because look.
Yeah, and it's really going to affect other people, like
exactly.
For example,
4 years ago. Yeah. 4 years ago, we were told that, there were fake elections, that there was collusion, that Russia did it, that Trump wasn't really elected, blah, blah, blah. This we had to believe. Now that 4 years on, that Trump is challenging the results of the election, they're dismissing him. So why is it okay for you to say something and we have to take you to your word and take you seriously and impeach this president? Why is it that when Trump says it, we have to shut up and actually listen to them, the Democrats, and believe that, no, there was no manipulation this time around? It's not. I mean, look, if you want to be reasonable, you're going to have to give Trump the benefit of the doubt and say, okay, if there is a claim, let's look at it. Mm-hmm. Let's be impartial and objective, and let's look at it and see if there's value to what he's saying. You can't just dismiss it. When you dismiss something like this, when you yourself use that very weapon and the same allegation to sustain your position, you're a hypocrite, and you're probably a liar.
Yeah.
So now I'm actually wondering, did they actually steal the elections? I mean, it's up to Trump to prove it, but we should be allowed to ask the question, because the second we're being dismissed for asking the question, I actually want to ask the questions louder now, because I'm thinking, what are you trying to hide? If there is nothing to hide, why don't you just open the books?
Sounds good. We are out of time, Catherine, unfortunately. But thanks very much. It's really been a pleasure.
Anytime. We could continue on whenever you have more time.
Thanks again to Catherine Shakdam for joining me this week on Wider View. I will post links to her recent articles in the show notes at widerviewradio.podbean.com. This is your host, Charles Dunaway. Thanks for listening to Wider View.